Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Front Door. I'm Scott Benedict. Today's conversation really tackles a topic that has become, in my view, mission critical for a number of different types of organizations, not just retailers, and that is digital transformation. There is a truth, in my view, and that is while most companies are focused on the technology, the real challenge lies in people and in culture that power and take advantage and leverage these new technologies. In retail specifically, this couldn't be more true, whether it's AI-driven merchandising or connected stores or retail media networks. Technology is accelerating change faster than, in some cases, teams that are tasked with running that part of the business can really adapt. What retailers and brands today need is not just digital expertise, but, in my view, digital wisdom. Joining me today is Barbara Wittmann. She is the founder and the CEO of the Digital Wisdom Collective. They are a consultancy that helps organizations reimagine transformation through the lens of human capability, leadership, and culture. Barbara has spent more than 25 years looking through the lens of human capability, leadership, and culture. She has led a number of complex IT and business transformations, and she is here to share her wisdom on how organizations that build digital infrastructure that turns digital strategy into real-world success and real-world results. And Barbara, welcome to the Digital Front Door.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation all day.
As have I. One of the things I've learned about you and your organization is that you are really doing what I think is some fascinating work, helping leaders aim technology and align it to innovation and purpose and people, quite frankly. And I kind of wanted to start with your perspective on how you think some of the barriers unfold in terms of how organizations, particularly within retailing, transform their business in many ways. And I think a lot of companies talk about transformation as it's just about a new platform, AI tools, data integration, things like that. But some of the things I've heard you say is that really the problem isn't technology, it's our orientation towards it. I'm just kind of curious, for the benefit of the audience, what do you mean when you say that? And how can retailers and brands start reframing digital transformation as a people-first, not a tech-first journey in your view?
Man, that in itself would be a half-day conversation here. So I'm trying to roll backwards a little bit and kind of start from where I came into the conversation. So for 25 years, I have worked mainly with retailers. So I'm excited that we're talking because that's my home base. And I basically came in when digital transformation or projects were broken. So when a project is basically the dead patient on life support, that's when I would rush in, right? All the big consultancies, they run off and they're like, hey, we got it, and I would come in and fix things. And, hey, at the start, it was the big adrenaline rush. I'm like, okay, this is cool. But then I found a repeating pattern that it never fails because of technology. It really fails because of the people are in the wrong place, have the wrong skills, or are simply not empowered to speak up what they see. So basically, in every project, I've encountered really, really capable people in organizations. And once you give them a little bit of support and a little bit of pick-me-up, they are excelling. And they're actually fixing the problem on their own. So my job became easy. And I was like, so how do I do this? And instead of always rushing in and doing the same thing over and over again, how can we prevent this from the get-go? So that's how I poured what I know from 25 years into what I do now. And so what I have observed and what my fix is to get around this, and obviously there is no easy answer because it is a systemic problem, is that you have to define a couple of people within your organization, and that is specifically the middle layer, because that's the layer where you cannot delegate complexity. Everything upstairs, complexity gets delegated. But in the middle layer, they are the executors. So you want to find the people who really are hungry for making things better. And you want to start empowering them. And if you have a certain number of people in your middle layer, and I always say you got to start with 4, they are starting to become a self-reinforcing ecosystem within the organization. So that is one part of your question, right? How do you get going in this? Generally, I think when you are picking out new technology and adding new technology to the stack, there needs to be a much broader perspective on what the implications are. So I think the problem that we are seeing with transformation failing also starts with how do we align strategy and how do we define initiatives from there? Because with every client that I see, they have too many of those. Right. It's almost like the fear of missing out, right? And with AI, things don't become better. So we need to start looking from many different angles and also look from the people perspective and say, are we stressing out our core resources? What do we do? Consultants alone are never the fix. And that seems to always be the very simple solution for organizations. And I mean, I know I'm shooting myself in the foot, right? I put myself out of a job, but I think I am more of an enabler than anything. And in these days, especially with AI, every organization, especially retail, because it's so much of the same, so you need a differentiator. You need to start cultivating in-house innovation drivers.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's so interesting because through my own e-commerce experience, I learned a lot about concepts like user acceptance testing, which is really not so much in the deployment phase as it is even in the design phase of a technology solution, where the people who are tasked with actually using whatever it is that's going to get built are this wonderful resource of what is the business problem, to your point, that you're trying to solve. And as you think about ways to solve it, are the individuals at multiple levels of the organization who are actually going to have to use that solution? Did they help design it? Are they on board with it? And are they effectively champions of it as it gets implemented across an organization? It's interesting. I was taught that by people from a software background, but I don't always see it implemented in other retail organizations or even places that I go to as a consumer today, where literally a technology solution is dropped on individuals and hope that works out. Here's the tech support phone number if you have a call. That's not really the way to do it, I think, is the way that you're talking about, the fact that you have to think about the humans that are going to use that solution. They're going to use that technology while you're designing it and as you're implementing it and even afterwards, rather than just dropping a solution and telling them to have a nice day, right?
Right, and it's the humans that are going to use it, but also the humans that are going to execute on making it happen. You're describing the textbook example on how it ought to be, but because in times where we are switching directions because of external factors, so often we are trying to cut corners, and that's the difficult thing, right? So in many projects that I step in to try and write things again, the problem was never really defined that they're trying to fix. Everyone is thinking in solution mode right away. And it seems it seems so natural, right? That we define the problem and then we go forward. But we're trying to save time and we're trying to jump into a solution right away. And then because we are in the solution without knowing the problem, it gets even worse, right? And then something comes out at the end that needs an entire rework. So, and that comes from pressure from the top for the most part. It's like, hey, we're short on time, we're short on money, so make it happen. So sometimes it really pays off to take a breath, and it doesn't mean that you have to entirely slow down, but it's about asking the right questions, and it really is an organizational muscle you can train.
Indeed. And kind of this human infrastructure is one of the things that in reading some of the materials that I've seen you share really resonates with me. And I'm curious, in retailing, in a number of different functions, whether it's in sales or merchandising or operations, it feels like technology adoption is often, it outpaces the cultural readiness of the organization. How do you define human infrastructure, and what does it look like inside a retailer or inside a consumer brand that's trying to modernize with new tools, with new data, with new business channels? What does that look like in your view?
That's an interesting one. So the human infrastructure means that you have core people in your organization that are functioning around a mindset for innovation. And a core group of people that have a clear direction of values. You know, the values that you function around, the values that you are saying yes or no to certain things. So that is the main two things. And also it consists of people that can connect the dots. And connecting the dots means across silos, across systems, from an end-to-end process perspective. And that is really the core traits of what we call the human infrastructure. And the key is, if you have a couple of people strategically positioned in your organization, again, middle layer, they are starting to become infectious. They are starting to get others inspired to really step it up and question things. And this whole equation of mindset to me is so critically important, because it really switches from, oh my God, that was a top level decision. You know, I cannot influence anything. It's the victim mode, right? To switching it over and saying, I'm seeing something that I can maybe address with my boss. And so they are becoming the doers. They are becoming the canaries in a way in the coal mine that see things that are not good, and they would have the backbone to address it. So it is a lot about how you are carrying yourself as a leader in a middle layer of an organization that really ties together human infrastructure. But that being said, it means that the people who are, pointed out as they can be the champions, they need to do a little bit of self-development work. That means they need to look at what are their own limiting beliefs, what is their own attitude that's not helping things.
No, and I love this concept of middle out leadership, and I want to explore that a little bit more, if that's okay. One of the things that really struck me in not only your comments today, but some of the things I've been reading about what you do is this concept of hidden change makers in an organization, not just at the top, but really, as you mentioned, throughout the middle of an organization. And it strikes me that in retailing, that could be category managers, it could be account executives at a consumer brand, it could be leaders of store operations in a field organization. And I'm curious, as you advise clients, how do some of those mid-level managers become the catalysts for transformation rather than just interpreters? And you kind of touched on that a little bit, as they have to have a certain level of self-confidence and be a little bit fearless, but maybe dive a level deeper about what are some of the characteristics of those middle out change leaders that you see are the most successful in the work that you've done.
Yeah. So in essence, they are really easy to spot because every organization has people that are always consulted, not openly, but people gravitate to them and ask for advice. And I'm sure as I'm saying this, everyone has at least one or two people in their head. Yes. And they are not usually the ones that are in a specific department. They are just the ones that carry either a lot of institutional knowledge or that simply have a very different angle to problems, right? Maybe some people that have a lot of customer touch points, or the people that are in the customer hotline seat and whatnot. So it usually is the ones that people gravitate to, that people trust, but they are also usually very quiet. They don't want to be visible. Yeah. And that's fine. That's okay. But if you strengthen these people, and they actually get a voice, they claim their seat at the change table. And that's the type of people you need in your organization to really excel. So how do you do this? Because you cannot train these people in your organization, because that is an echo chamber. Sorry to say that, right? Even if you do individual trainings and whatnot, no one will ever openly speak about what's going on, or because it's over, you put on a great face, right? And the other thing is, it's again a paradox in itself. When we have new software implemented, we have several test cycles before we set it live. Right. Well, we don't do that with people, because if we upgrade what we know, we don't have a test environment. So I offer them a test environment, and I put together small and curated cohorts, and that is cross-industry and cross-hierarchy. It's a safe space. We meet 2 times a month. So the invested time is very low. There is a self-study portion for the mindset piece that we are teaching. So it's a 3 to 5 hour time invest per month. So what that does is several things. It gives them a testing sandbox, right? They can show up as they are. They can try out things that they have learned in the workbooks. And they can show up with a different side of them that they may not feel comfortable showing yet. So we have a space where they can gain confidence, where they can really build that muscle. And we throw together people from different angles. I was just running a group this morning, and there's, for example, for-profit and non-profit in there. At first glance, they would say, I have nothing to tell you. But then at the end of the day, it all comes down to the same basics. It all comes down to, what are you focusing on? What is your attitude towards things? And it's also asking people and hearing that people can give you advice that are so out of your wheelhouse. So what they are trying out in our closed groups, they can directly transform and bring back into the organization, because what they will do is they will ask different people, and they usually ask.
It's interesting because as you were talking about that, it occurs to me in my own experience that I've seen examples of people who go through processes like this, and they were already perhaps the loud and boisterous and the what about askers, if you will, in meetings. And then there are others who are the exact opposite, that were maybe inclined to be rather timid and weren't used to having someone ask them what they thought. And just the simple act of having a group like what you just described in a setting and an environment where they're encouraged to share their expertise, not only does the project and the transformation benefit, perhaps it also helps develop them as potential leaders, because they get a little bit of confidence that maybe they weren't getting in the everyday of their job, but being through this project maybe and getting asked for their expertise and their perspective and their expertise builds potentially future leaders of an organization that the company might not have found were it not for this process that you've kind of led them through. Is that accurate in your view?
That's absolutely accurate, because they would always fall through the cracks of any high potential program, right? They would never be regarded because only the loud voices are heard. And frankly, in today's time, to make the loud voices louder is not really helping us as an organization, right? And also, to stoke their ego is not really helping us. So, we're much better off at really empowering the timid people in the organization that actually have something to say and have an interest of holding the strings together and actually being a translator. So what I've seen I've ran these groups for a year and a half. So on average, about 70% of people get promoted within the first year. Wow. Because they are stepping it up. They are becoming proactive. They are saying, hey, if we want to make projects faster, I have a couple of ideas. Would you be open to listen to this? So they actually have, the courage to step it up and say, hey, I can be vulnerable. I can bring in my ideas, because they have had positive experiences in our close group. The other thing that I just want to throw in as another statistic is that almost 80% of the participants are millennials. And they would never get any type of sophisticated training within the organization, because they are not the top-notch tier and they are not the hot young guns that are being brought in. So you're leaving a ton of potential that is unattended right now.
No, that makes so much sense. And I've had the opportunity to witness exactly what you're describing in some of the organizations. And it was wonderful to see through a transformation process, some of these people become leaders of their full potential. But it really started with pulling out their expertise into an environment that they felt confident in sharing it, and then them gaining that confidence. And I've witnessed what you're describing so many times. And it's so wonderful to see as a leader, but I fear that so many organizations miss that opportunity in the spirit of moving fast and trying to get to a deadline and not taking the opportunity to get the full benefit of the knowledge and expertise of members of their team, right?
Yeah. And the other paradox that I see is that we are spending a set amount of money every year to upgrade our servers, to see that our cybersecurity is all tucked up, all important things, right? But then on the other hand, we are not tending to a human infrastructure in exactly the same way. And we think that it's a one-time upgrade. And instead, we are lagging way behind. If you look at AI models, it's getting updated at the speed of light. So we are also needing to tend to human infrastructure, collective intelligence. So what I offer to companies is not a one-off training. These alumni people remain part of the external ecosystem that I offer, and they can go through continuous upgrades, dip into that community while they are starting to build their in-house ecosystem. And that to me is a huge success factor because they still have the backup. At the start of things, they will still be the odd ones out that bring a new type of thinking. So you need to give them some backing where they can go and say, hey, just, give me a little bit of pick-me-up.
That makes a lot of sense. In my role as a consultant, I talk to retailers all the time that feel like they are drowning in tools, whether that is, I should say, tools and dashboards. It could be things like retail media dashboards or digital shelf analytics or supply chain visibility. And I'm curious, as you advise clients on how to cut through the noise and find the actual the wisdom, if you will, clarity on what really matters to the future of their business, and how do they make all these technologies work? Are there any kind of recurring themes that you see in terms of how they take this increased flow of data and metrics that perhaps they didn't have 10 years earlier and turn it into action or actionable insights? Well, what do you think of that?
Oh, that is such a loaded topic, man.
Forgive me.
No, it's good. So last year I stepped into being interim CIO for a couple of months for one of my retail clients. So, and I can tell you that the other side of the fence is ugly. So I would caution everyone at this point to add more tools. I think the best investment that you can make is to look at your data right after your people, obviously. But I always compare what we have, and it's so valid for retail because there's so many different things, as you say. It's like an untended forest. You just have the next software thing sprouting up, and it's even worse with agentic AI and such. So how do you weed your way through the forest? Seriously, there is and at some point you need to bring your machete and it's not happy, right? Because you need to start breaking things, and that's what happens. So what I do a lot with clients is I create a navigation infrastructure for them. And this is something that is the most profound and yet the most simple thing, but companies don't have it. And I may totally date myself now as starting to get really old, but in my day, when we started driving cars, we had maps, physical maps, right? Went on a road trip, put it on the hood of the car and said, oh, look, we're here, and this is where we want to go. And this is essentially what companies are lacking. If I look at some of my clients, they have massive amounts of documentation, of tools and everything. They have over 2,000 processes, minutely detailed. But no one sees the forest for the trees. So what I do is maps that are high level and static. Mm-hmm. Because if you go to a certain level, it never changes. Right. Except you are adding yet another system. Same goes for data maps, by the way. Mm-hmm. And I don't stick to the common rules, so whoever is into any modeling strategy hates me from the get-go, right? But I am in the business of making things visible and understandable. Right. And then I hang these maps as big printouts in the meeting rooms, and that really, really helps. And you need to sing for your systems, also for your data, how that's connected. It really answers so many questions. So you need to start creating transparency. Transparency sometimes is not really wanted by some departments, but that's why I do that as an external source. I can cut through the noise, and then once they have it, the people that are empowered through my training can use that as a resource.
That makes a lot of sense, and it leads to the next question I was going to ask you. We're obviously seeing a tremendous amount of change in the retail workforce itself, hybrid working models where not everybody's working in the same office, the same location. Obviously, the use of AI that automates a number of tasks, and a lot of rising expectations around teams that aren't necessarily all in the same place, collaborating and driving towards an ultimate outcome. And I'm just curious what your perspective is on how retail leaders should be thinking about reskilling or upskilling their teams, how communication of distributed teams maybe needs to be done better, and how do you prepare teams not just for the project they're working on today, but maybe to be an organization that transforms and evolves on an ongoing basis going forward? Do you have any advice that you give maybe senior leaders on what they should be thinking about over the long term, not just today or this quarter's project or initiative?
So the biggest and best tool I have found is what is called shared mental model. So that we all understand the same thing when we talk about the same thing, right? So instead of throwing more communication tools or the next best practice at it, what I would advise people is to create artifacts that help you to understand the same things. So that can be a very simple glossary, things that are repeatedly used over and over. Yeah. For example, for an initiative, what is the scope? So when I go into meetings and I hear about 10 times in the meeting, the scope is clear, it raises red flags for me, right?
I'll bet.
So, to just have the outline, what are our guardrails? And what I keep doing with my groups, and at first they are so irritated, but they keep getting it because we're creatures of habit. We learn by repeating. So every meeting, and it's almost religious, it's like the prayer. You pull up the same slides. You say, hey, we set out to do this. And then you bring a visual and you say, this is what we want to have at the end of the game. It really is aligning people around the same thing, right?
No, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think that there are tools that enable that, even if the team is not all together, but perhaps, if anything, a distributed team in multiple time zones, that communication, that refocus on this is our purpose, this is where we're headed, perhaps even gets more important in those scenarios than if it's a team leading an initiative that all works out of the same room in the same office, right?
Absolutely. And, if you talk distributed teams, maybe also across continents, also visuals become so important because language can be misunderstood. So having a crisp visual of where you're going and why you're doing it, super important. Also, what people keep underestimating is the ground rules when you start a project. And usually from my consulting background, working for large consultancies, it was more of a static thing, but we don't do this and we don't do that. And then it's more, it's kind of pushed onto people, and that's never good because, hey, I was one of those children, maybe you were too, but whenever somebody told me not to do something, I became rebellious, right? So it's also about setting these boundaries jointly. And that's why at the core of our model is values, and we define 3 values that are important for a team or for an initiative. And you say how these show up. If we say trust is important, how do we come together and show each other trust? So if it's a co-creation process, everyone is bought in. And then when you bring these things up at the start of each meeting and say, hey, remember our 3 core values, it rings true for people. You can also cycle around and say, hey, for the start of it, give me one example how one of those values showed up in a positive way. So it is starting to become a self-reinforcing cycle, right?
No, and it's interesting because what I think you're describing is the very antithesis of retail as a learning organization. In other words, the retailers that I think do best think like startups, even if they aren't still a startup in the context of size or the amount of time that they've been in business. And I'm curious, your concept of digital wisdom, how does it connect to that? How can retail leaders build a culture of curiosity, of it's okay to experiment and potentially fail at something, but learn from it, and make learning and iterating kind of part of the DNA of an organization as it moves forward into the future?
Mm-hmm. So essentially, it falls back to mindset, right? You want to create, and that's an intrinsic thing for core people. You want to empower them to go beyond their known fence line, right? And you want to empower them to bring people together into smaller groups to discuss things. And that's when naturally innovation happens. So if you give them permission, they would usually come up with very creative ways to come up with new things to do or find improvements and so on. So I think we've all overcomplicated things, that it's like, oh my God, we need an innovation culture, and maybe we just need to pull the stops out for some other people, and they are getting everyone else excited. So that's one piece. The other core principle that I think, and that's also a mindset thing, we talk about ecosystems, and ecosystems are generally cyclical. They run in cycles, but we all function linear. So, we cannot preach one thing and do the other thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's like, it's right now we are killing our own ideas through that. So that means if you give people the freedom to play around with things, or if you ask their opinion, you need to give them a little bit of breathing space to play. And that doesn't mean that they need, 10 days out of the year or something. It's just, it's maybe, it's not like asking them every 5 minutes, got it yet? What? And also not rushing from one initiative to the next, because they don't, there's so many ideas in the organization, but they don't have any breathing space in terms of just mind capacity, right? Because we have gotten so good at starting things. It's like it's always 10 projects going in parallel. Well, maybe we can just slim that down a little bit, and then we fix our innovation problem. So, but that also starts at the very top, and I run a workshop that's called Mindset Before Machines. and I do that with leadership teams. It's quite fun. I'll bet. Because they come in with a technology that they think they need, right? And by the time you go through the process with them, they're like, well, wait, but now we talked for 2 hours and we didn't talk technology. And it's like, oh, right. Yeah, it's an organizational problem.
Yeah. No, and that's the interesting thing, is that in some cases, it's not how are we going to implement this technology, is do we need it, and why do we need it, and how will ultimately the customer benefit in their internal resources, store associates, for example, how will they benefit from it? How will they make their job easier? And it's so interesting that dialogue, that communication that you referenced doesn't always happen. And I think it's going to evolve the way senior leaders need to lead initiatives, which is to do as much asking why as they do, asking how about things, because that's part of where innovation, I think, comes from, and just being task focused instead of outcome focused is perhaps at the core of some of the things that you really guide some of your clients through, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I would also argue that most retailers, what they have in technology stack right now, they only use to 50%, and that's a high assumption.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've witnessed just that very thing. So yes.
Right. So it's rather the question of how can we optimize what we already have without adding yet another thing. And I know that's a little bit contrary because, boy, I mean, these software companies, they are good at selling stuff, right? And we also need to cut back a little bit on, seriously, I think it's fear of missing out. It's like, oh my God. But there's so much of value in the organization, be it data, be it systems that just need a little tweaking, that you can do a lot with very little.
Interesting. The last thing I wanted to ask you is maybe to look forward into the future a little bit, and I'm curious where you see the next wave of transformation going, and what does maybe the digitally wise organization look like 3, 4, 5 years down the road? And do you have any advice that you would give retail executives that want to the degree possible, future-proof their teams and build a culture that is effective at innovating and using technology as a tool to drive their business forward? Any thoughts on that?
So a digitally wise organization expands their architecture team. And it is looking at different layers of architecture. It is looking at the human architecture. It is looking at the technical architecture, and also what I call orientation. What artifacts do we have to actually make informed decisions? Right. And obviously also looking at data in an entirely different way. So wisdom is where all these things converge, and where you are making decisions that doesn't topple one or the other, that actually strengthens and complements everything you already have. That is the wise organization. And that would mean that maybe there's a little bit the foot taken off the gas for just upping the technology budget we have every year. And you would also look at investments in a much broader way.
That makes a lot of sense. Barbara, this has been such an enlightening conversation, and you've reminded us a lot that transformation isn't just a technology project, it's a people project every bit as much. It occurs to me that retailers and brands can invest in all the AI, automation, data analytics in the world, but if they don't invest in people and in culture that bring these tools to life, they will never realize the full value of that initiative. And you just kind of firmed up that perspective, I think, in my mind, and hopefully in our listeners as well. I know that the work that you do at the Digital Wisdom Collective shows that digital maturity begins with human maturity, with leadership, with trust, as you spoke to, and collaboration as the foundation of every innovation that follows. And so I just want to thank you for sharing your thoughts and giving, I think, certainly me and I think our audience something to think about. So thank you for joining us. Wonderful. Thanks for having me. You bet. And for our listeners, if your organization is navigating through digital transformation, I haven't met a organization in retailing that isn't right now, and wants to understand how to align technology with purpose and people, I'd invite you to visit Barbara's website, thedigitalwisdomcollective.com, to learn more about her work and ways in which you can think differently about innovation and technology and how it's used to drive your business forward. And so with that, I want to thank everybody for watching. I'm Scott Benedict, and for the Digital Front Door, thanks for listening.